Hello, everyone. One of the great critiques of libertarianism, can't even say it, comes from none other than the patron saint of capitalism himself, Adam Smith, one of the most misquoted and misinterpreted men of our age. Anyhow, how did he make this critique before libertarianism was even invented as a term? Well, in Wealth of Nations, on page 148, I believe, he said, "People of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public, or in some contrivance to raise prices." And so, given that this has been true of mercantilism of any kind, of capitalism of any kind, as well, for as long as these things have been around and longer, and given that libertarianism believes that government should not be involved in the markets, I'm forced to conclude that libertarianism is the philosophy of not only fuck you, I've got mine, but let the collapse happen, let the damage happen to who it will, and people will rebuild afterward again and will have learned from their mistakes, as if the entire previous human history, the entirety of human history, wouldn't be a counterexample to learning from our mistakes. Someone somewhere is going to do it again. Well, I won't go into the whole invisible hand thing, but do look up where Adam Smith first talked about the invisible hand, or where he referred obliquely to it, and realize it wasn't precisely the way it's used now, and why I refer to it as the imaginary invisible hand job of the markets. But that being said, if in libertarianism the government is supposed to have the monopoly on the use of force, and only through lawsuits is the government supposed to get involved about someone causing someone else damages, say by dumping their toxic waste into someone else's fish farm, then how is government supposed to make decisions about what causes effects and what doesn't outside of the relatively arbitrary domain of the courts? And by arbitrary, I mean that judges are not held accountable to the population in any significant way. And elected judges have proven universally to be a bad idea, simply by the fact that making political decisions from the bench is a recipe for cronyism far worse than we have under the lobbyist representative system we have now, or lobbied representative. And going further than that, if the government is supposed to enforce these decisions, and if the government is supposed to have the monopoly on force, and if the government is supposed to be able to have the power to enforce these decisions and defend the nation from external and internal threats, then it seems to me that what the libertarian is arguing for is a police state geared solely to protect its richest clients. I'm not saying that's how it would start, but that is definitely where it would wind up, because as disaffection grew and property interests became more and more under attack, and as more and more lawyers brought into the court suits against those who did not have the legal recourse to defend themselves, and I'm not talking about just being represented in court, I'm talking about able to hire lawyers and people to write research papers and PR firms and things like that that the average citizen does not have access to. And given the fact that the government is composed of human beings, then how is it supposed to not wind up? What magical force is supposed to keep the government pure and separate? And speaking of which, my third and last major... No, actually, I've got one more after that. But my third critique of libertarianism is the idea love Glenn Morangi. My third major critique of libertarianism is that there is this division made between government and the market that doesn't exist. Because as far as I'm concerned, and as far as is observable, the market is anywhere where discussions over the exchange of items of value, takes place. And that takes place everywhere, in every moment of our lives. And most especially that takes place in government, not the least of which because the government does consume goods, does provide services, even in a libertarian utopia where the only service was to protect against external and internal threats, and therefore to underscore the stability of the currency by defending that which it represents. Or just to defend the banks if the currency was completely private, if every bank issued their own currency. That is a staggering service. So I don't see how you can separate the markets and government unless you somehow manage to remove economic incentive from politics. And since politics is precisely about the distribution of resources, I don't see how that's possible. So that utopia is... In any case, looking at the idea of libertarianism as an economic philosophy as well as a social one, it assumes that productive philosophies, as in that self-interested philosophies will be more productive than self-destructive ones. And I don't mean it explicitly makes this assumption, I mean in order for it to work, self-destructive impulses would have to be weeded out. Essentially, there would have to be a social Darwinism in operation that isn't there. Because we know that stupid people do succeed. We know that people who make egregiously bad decisions succeed for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with merit or wise decision making or anything having to do with fairness. So it seems to me that the entire idea of libertarianism is, oh, it's all too complicated, we should just let it happen the way it does and live with that. And to close, I would like to remind everyone what the ultimate state of a self-correcting system is. And that is maximized entropy as evenly distributed as possible. Death, essentially, of the system or of the organism. And I don't think that's something we want to encourage or let happen as freely as possible. So, while I am not a statist, I am most decidedly not a libertarian. Thank you for your time and attention.